Well, I thought I'd do a video here on a Q&A. There's a lot of people that had a lot of different questions, and figured I'd try to get it in a video here just to try to answer as many of them as I could because of how unique the trip was. And the trip was, I was on a jet ski for a little over 3 months doing America's Great Loop, and so I believe I'm only the third person to do it. There might be some others. I just don't know of their names. Would love to know if they're out there who have done it all in one shot. But nonetheless, you all had some great questions, and lots of them were submitted. A lot of them were duplicates, but nonetheless, a lot of them were answered by the numbers videos that I put out. So for the rest of them, I'm going to try to do my best to answer them here. So the number one question asked by far, am I crazy? Right? Are you crazy? Or more definitively, they would say, you're crazy. And without I mean, it was like when I met somebody new on the trip, it was, you're doing what? And you're crazy. So am I crazy? Was I crazy to do it? A little bit, yes. Maybe even some naivety to go with it, but I prepared like mad to try to, fend off as much as I could, but definitely rolled the dice with things like the weather or I had to pay attention to it. And so I'd like to think I'm not crazy, but you have to have a pretty strong desire to get out there and go do this if you're going to go do it in one shot. What made me decide to do it? Why did I do it? Has it been done before? So as mentioned, to my knowledge, it's been done twice before. The last time that I know of was by a guy, what was it, in 2002. Larry Harcum did it. So this is just the four-stroke machines were just coming out, but they're certainly smaller machines. The hulls were not as deep, and so he took a beating. He didn't have the electronics. Um, you know, do other jet skiers do the loop? Absolutely. There's plenty that go out there and do it in sections, right? They'll take a week or two every year, and they'll go complete 1,000 miles or 1,500 miles, and then next year go bite off the next chunk. So to do it on a ski all in one go, you really have to go quickly because of the weather, and you have to really have a tenacity to just keep going. And so I hope I'm not crazy. Would I do it again? This was also asked quite commonly. Two ways to answer that. The first is, knowing what I know now, would I do it the first time, right? Am I glad that I did the trip? Absolutely. It went off, like I said in one of my other videos, no regrets. It was an amazing adventure. It went so well. I'm getting goosebumps here. Yes, I'm so happy I did the trip. Would I do it a second time on a jet ski? When I just got done with the trip, it was no way. As I sit and think about it more, maybe, but I doubt it. It went too well. The second time around would never live up to the first time. So, and so what about a group ride? Would you, be a tour guide, and, would you do it with a ski with some friends? Number one, I worked on this trip, so taking anybody along with me on that kind of a trip and working is nearly impossible because they would have to live by my work schedule, so that wouldn't have worked. Number two, even if I was retired or didn't have to work, it is an endurance challenge, and people are just wired differently, physically as well as mentally. And so were there some days where other people might have said, you know what, I need one more day to recover, or I want to ride further today, or I want to quit early today. And boy, they need that ability with their own body and know their own uh, strengths and their own points of when they need to stop. It would be very hard to ride the whole thing in 3 months with other people. You just got to know your own limits and listen to them. So that would be very, very difficult to do the entire loop on a jet ski as a guide and be responsible for other people's physical capabilities and limits. What about by boat? Maybe with my family and a cruiser or something like that. I would love to do it in a boat. Okay, I'm not sure if it'll happen. I'm not a boater, never owned a boat, and buying a jet ski that you can toss in the garage and maintenance on it is fairly straightforward or simpler, is a completely different animal than going out and buying some kind of a cabin cruiser or something that is essentially a motorhome on water, um, meaning they're even more complex in a lot of ways than a motorhome. Uh, and doing it on a jet ski does not make me a good captain of a boat. So, um, would I enjoy it? Absolutely. Did I look at other loopers who had those boats and say, man, that's the way to go? Oh yeah, oh yeah. However, my trip was more of a Mount Everest, right? It was just a little different. I know I was skipping a lot of ports, so it's kind of a long-winded answer. Would I be interested in doing it by boat? Oh yeah. Will I do it by boat? I just don't know if that's in the cards. Here's a couple of great questions from other jet skiers that are out there. Did I encounter a bias from other boaters because I was on a personal watercraft? And this is a great question. So if you stop and think about it, right, a lot of the other jet skiers that are on the water, they are younger. They're not like what I'm doing, right? I am more of a transiting from one point to another point A to point B, and I was doing it in endurance style, which meant I had to be careful. I couldn't be reckless all the time, or just go out there and run it. And there's a lot of people that rent jet skis, and they don't know the rules. They're buzzing around. They jump wakes. They cut people off. They stop in the middle of the water, in the middle, the channel. So there's definitely a bad rap out there for jet skiers and by other boats. I totally get it. And in fact, there were other jet skiers that I met that I thought the same thing. They cut me off or they sprayed me with water. They didn't mean to, but they just weren't paying attention. And they were blasting through no wake zones. So fortunately, I personally did not hear of any bias, especially once people figured out what I was doing and that I wasn't, raising a bunch of heck. Um, there was a big rally cry around me. So I did not get that bias, and especially when they looked at my rig and the machine and they saw the 4 gas cans and I was really well outfitted, they understood pretty quickly that, okay, maybe this guy is more boat-like than your weekend jet skier, if you will. Don't mean to stereotype all the skiers. I'm not, I would never do that to myself, and don't mean to do that to the respected skiers. It's just the bad rap that we've got. All right, what's your number one recommendation to somebody that would be interested in completing this on a ski? You got to prepare. You have to prepare. You have to think ahead of what you're going to need every step of the way. You cannot be caught by surprise 10 miles offshore or in the middle of a long 200-mile day and think, oh man, I really need this, or I didn't just you really have to prepare. And the number one recommendation is to have great charts. I had my Garmin unit that's on the machine as a chart plotter, and then I had a tablet on the handlebars as a second chart plotter running Navionics, And so by having those two things, that gave me a ton of confidence to know where the channel is, where the route is, where the turns are, how much longer I've got to go in the day. So that would be my recommendation. What was the hardest? And you could really kind of break that up and, hardest or scariest or most challenging part. And this was asked by many, some are especially asked what was the most challenging part there. And the hardest part was sending my body into battle into the big water. After I got a taste of the Gulf, literally, and I ran 175 miles, kind of in the Gulf waters of Florida, I got a pretty good understanding of what it's like to run that long in big water. And then when I came around to Albemarle Sound, near Virginia, or North Carolina, but roughly in there, that was big water. And it was several hours of 4 to 6 footers. And being in the middle of that and just knowing that I had to push through. And then another one, excuse me, another one was Lake Michigan, where I was cutting across the lake and I was hugging the shoreline, and it was beautiful water because the way the winds were blowing. But I knew I had to cut across, and I knew that the winds were blowing behind me. The winds were with me, but the waves were going to build, and I knew what my body was going to go through, and it was torture. It was just 6 hours of, or depending on the day, hours and hours of just body torture. So, or punishment, however you want to put it. So that was hard, of knowingly putting my body through that. And it's one thing when the ski comes up. I tried to describe this as best I could, but when the ski comes up, it hits a wave and it kind of comes up. You can absorb that. You can absorb a lot of that. It's when the ballast ski drops, and the handlebars go with it, and therefore your arms just take this vigorous jolt, and it all through your neck, and it just bam. It was hard. So that was the hardest part. Was I ever afraid? What was the most fearful part? I'm very fortunate that I never got to the point where I was flat out afraid. Many times I was very concerned, right? And just elevated levels of, pay attention here. You really got to ski technically well. You can't just blindly run it. You have to really pay attention to the waves in front of you. And at one point, I would normally run about a mile offshore. It was on Lake Michigan, near Ludington, but couldn't make Ludington, had to go into Manistee instead, and the waves were building against me. Every time the bow went up on a wave, it would crash down, splash waves against me. That was the one time where I cut it in real close to shore, and with the thought of, if I've got a ditch, I'm running the ski up on the shore. Luckily, another town was up ahead and didn't have to do that. So that was the point where I was probably most concerned, but really never afraid. Do you ever feel like giving up? There were a couple of times where I really started to doubt whether I could push on doing this. And it wasn't just the skiing that made it hard, and I'll answer this, weather the storm, but a surprising answer to this is booking the reservations. And it's one thing to do all this skiing, even in rough water or big water, but at the end of the day, I had to turn around and play travel agent of, okay, where am I going to be tomorrow? And try to book a slip, book a hotel, as reasonable rates. Are they close to each other, or is there an Uber? And you throw all of that in when the ski wouldn't start reliably. There was a starting issue in the ski, kind of in the Florida parts. Um, it was exhausting. I couldn't book anything in advance because I didn't know if the ski would start in the morning. And then I was playing travel agent in the morning. Oh, okay, it started. Okay, now I know I can go to point B, whatever that was. Um, it was exhausting, and I just if that would have kept going like that, I would have had to have slowed down the trip, where I'd have more down days and not keep such a furious pace. So it's kind of a surprising answer that the booking of the reservations would be the hardest part of the trip. But when you can't, when I couldn't rely on the ski starting, and it just really kind of started a domino effect of, or it just made things really hard. Weather, I had amazing weather. Other than that, the winds coming against me on Lake Michigan, and they built to a point where I wasn't. I was trying to beat it essentially, but it built faster than I could get through it, and so ended up tucking in early. Otherwise, I had really good weather. All right, so that was the worst part, right? Now, what about the best part? So, and I was asked by many people, but what was the best part? And by far and away, the hosts, the uh, the hosts, and other people that supported me along the way. But this was a huge surprise to me. I figured some would reach out, but the number of people that did reach out and offer their home or boat, depending on who it was, a spare bedroom essentially, offered me meals and a place for my ski. But it was meeting the people, and most of them are in the boating community, and so had some things in common there in terms of loving the water and things like that. But I met so many cool, amazing people, and it didn't matter, you know, their background or anything like that. We all just kind of had this common passion of getting out there and going and doing it. So yes, those were a big best part. Another part that I really enjoyed was the support by the actual loopers, those that were on boats with flying the flag on the loop. And it took me a while to catch up to most of them, just because of the way they travel. They generally are up north in the summertime, and they're getting ready to head down the rivers to the Gulf in the fall. And so I knew that when I got to the Great Lakes and Chicago, that's when I would probably catch up with most of them. But when I passed by so many of these other loopers, they would be on their boats and giving me these, fist pumps, go get them. They were rooting for the underdog. And that gave me so much energy. It was a little bit of a surprise that I would get so much support. Um, it shouldn't have been, now that I know and understand a lot of these folks. But it was, I could correlate it to a movie, and you'd make fun of me, but it was kind of like Smokey and the Bandit coming into the finish line, and how there were so many people cheering for me, and passing by other boats or other trucks or whatever. But the amount of support was amazing. It gave me a lot of energy. And another surprise, another best part, or kind of the biggest surprise, Atlantic City. I was prepared for the worst as far as going through neighborhoods, but there was this one section uh, that we went through, and it was more Water Street, almost Italian-like or European-like, where the backs of the houses backed up to a very tranquil water street that we navigated through, no wake. And the houses had essentially garages where the boats pulled into the garage under the house on stilts. Did not expect that, was kind of expecting and heard of the worst out of Atlantic City, but it was so peaceful, and that was the biggest surprise. All right, speaking of those hosts, how many hosts were scheduled? and how many jumped on board. So I only knew of 3 people along the route that I planned to stay with ahead of time. One is a niece in Chicago. One is a high school classmate in Virginia, Stacy, who rode with me. And then another was a coworker in North Carolina. Beyond that, I did not have any pre-scheduled. They all started reaching out to me either just before I left on the trip or while I was on the trip. That's the vast majority of them. So that was huge. And it was so refreshing to be done. Private message me and say, hey, I live in, such and such city, got a house, got a spare bed, etc. So that was great. How and where did I sleep? So I did not camp the whole trip. I only camped really on the Missouri River and on the Mississippi River for one night. But mostly it was hotels and of course marinas for the machine, and then the hosts that reached out. And I kind of got a breakdown of that on my By the Numbers if you want to watch that. Did I have definitive lodging plans before I started, or did I make lodging decisions daily? Definitely did not have lodging plans ahead of time. Everything was a daily decision. Now, camping on the river, that's a little bit easy. You just kind of, towards the end of the day, you start watching for sandbars, and it's like, okay, that makes a good one. And then I knew Alton Marina was where I wanted to kind of start and cross my wake. So that was kind of a known. And then, but beyond that, no, every day, the night before or 2 nights before, I would be looking out and saying, well, okay, now that I'm here, I think I can get to this city, and that's kind of where I want to get to, roughly 100 or so miles, further along. And so that's, as I mentioned, that was kind of a stress point of the trip, is playing that travel agent all the time and trying to book ahead.
I'm going to break up the Q&A session into a couple of parts here. So just thought I'd play a little peekaboo with my train track and bring a close to this first part here of the Q&A. Look for another round of Q&A as I get around to editing it and cutting it. So thanks again, everyone.